The video of my son shoving me through the drywall played behind the lawyer as he read the will, and the only sound in that carpeted conference room was the faint hiss of the projector and my daughter-in-law's breathing getting sharper by the second. By then, my money had already changed hands. The house had a new owner with a name they'd never guess was me, and the hole in the kitchen had been patched so neatly you'd need a spirit level to know where the impact had been. The only question left was the one that had haunted me from the moment my back met the studs. How did a mother raise a son who could do that? I am 69, which is old enough to be called stubborn for the same opinions you're praised for at 40. I bake, I drive, I do chair yoga most mornings, I've lived in the same coastal town for 43 years, and I can change a flat tire faster than my son can get a roadside assistance app to load. I never had a taste for drama. But life has a way of setting the stage for you anyway, and the day my own child put his hands on my shoulders and meant to move me like a piece of furniture, I understood that patience without boundaries is just permission with better manners. The money wasn't dirty. Let me say that first. It was clean the way a buck can be, considering all the places dollars have been. When I was 28 and my husband was still alive, we bought a tired, yellow brick warehouse at a tax auction. Everyone else called it a lemon. We called it rent. Over decades, I learned to hammer, patch, and smile my way through city inspections. I also learned to read leases the way other people read horoscopes, looking for the fine print that tells you who you'll be in 2 months if you're not careful. When the town finally woke up to its water views and converted the factory district to the waterfront arts corridor, my lemon turned into a grove. A developer bought us out politely, relentlessly, and in cash. Add in the life insurance, a second warehouse I'd kept quiet about even for myself, and a portfolio of plain vanilla bonds that grew with the patience of vinegar, and that was that. 10 million, give or take fees, and the market's mood. Why hide it? Because people change around money. I've seen boyfriends turn into bankers and cousins turn into plaintiffs when a windfall shows up. My husband, rest his soul, used to say, "You can't know how honest anyone is until you hand them a full cookie jar and walk away." Since he died, I've kept my own jars. One of them was literal, an envelope of paperwork glued behind the pantry shelf, deeds, trust papers, a letter written in my awkward cursive that began, "If you've found this, please sit down before you read." That letter mentioned the sum only once, because a number is a magnet and I didn't want it to erase the rest of the words. My son, Nathan, is 41 and married to a woman named Hannah who sells houses like they are brunch reservations, light, casual, as if they were always meant to be yours. She is gracious in ways that make people forget to count the zeros. Together, they have 2 children I adore, who still smell like crayons and library books. I have given generously camp fees, braces, a used SUV that I negotiated for like a submarine fleet, but I have kept the skeleton of my finances under a cardigan. When you're a mother, you think hiding your success is modest. Sometimes it's just self-defense. The trouble started with a small thing. Isn't that always how it goes? A locked mailbox key going missing. A lost insurance statement. A series of casual questions that felt rehearsed. Mom, what's your property tax again? Do you keep your passwords in one place? Have you thought about a power of attorney? I told myself it was concern wrapped in poor wording, but a sentence can be both a question and a trap. Then Nathan and Hannah began to talk about simplifying my life. The word simplify is a cousin of minimize, and if you say it with enough warmth, it rhymes with infantilize. They suggested an apartment near them, elevators, mom, and a doorman. You'd love not having to shovel. They suggested selling my house before the market dips. They suggested I sign a stack of papers so they could help with the logistics. The logistics looked suspiciously like my signature under their mortgage. I declined. Politely at first, then more like a weather report. Storm warning. Seek shelter. Mom, Nathan said one Sunday, "We're just trying to help you not get taken advantage of." By whom? I asked, and it was an honest question. He glanced at Hannah. Scammers. Contractors. People who see an older woman and think that she can't read, I finished. Or think for herself. I can. I've had practice. Hannah reached for my hand. She has the warmest hands in the world, which is an unfair fact to remember when I think of what came next. We worry, she said. And we'd sleep better if we knew you had a plan. I did have a plan. It just didn't include them yet. People think plans are maps. They're not. They're weather. They change. Mine had 3 parts: disappear what I could, display what I needed to, and document everything else. I changed the title on the house to a trust with a bland name and an out-of-state mailing address. I moved my liquid assets into 2 conservative funds under 2 conservative custodians, plus 1 checking account for utilities and groceries. I hired a lawyer who looks like a grandmother herself until you see her eyes on a spreadsheet. I installed a doorbell camera and a sensor in the pantry because sometimes your proof follows sound before it follows sight. I also did one more thing that felt silly until it mattered. I hired a contractor to take down the drywall in the kitchen, which has been needing a fresh run of wiring for years. In the process, I traced where studs sat, how the joists ran, and which sections of wall would flex instead of break. I have never been a fearful woman, but I've always been a prepared one. And I was tired of being surprised. 3 Thursdays later, Nathan and Hannah arrived with a casserole and those smiles people wear when they've made a decision for you. The sky was a pewter lid. It was going to rain. They didn't take off their shoes. We went ahead and booked a meeting with a financial advisor, Nathan said, setting the casserole on the counter with a thunk. He specializes in elder planning. I'm not elderly, I said, because sometimes it's the principle. I'm older. It's a different sentence. It's just a conversation, Hannah said, her voice sweet enough to pour. He'll help us, help you, make sure you're secure. You won't have to worry. Worry? I had been worried since my son started using we to describe my life. I poured tea and didn't drink it. The house hummed with its small, reliable noises: the fridge relay, the water heater, the clock that ticks loudest when you want it quiet. I watched their eyes flick to the pantry 3 times, to the wall heater twice, to the drawer where I've always kept my stamps. They were cataloging. Your neighbor said you had a fall, Nathan said lightly. I missed a step. I caught myself. Right, he said. Then the tone changed, as sudden as a dropped metal pan. It's not safe, Mom. Look at this house. No grab rails. Loose rug edges. This is where accidents happen. And kitchens, Hannah added, don't age well. Did you know gas stoves emit? I do know, I said. I also know when someone wants me to sign something. Silence. More tea. Rain began, the light kind that sounds like beads on glass. We brought the papers because the advisor wanted you to review them, Hannah said finally, sliding a manila folder across the counter. No pressure, of course. No, I said to the folder, not to her. She pulled it back, a blush rising in 2 careful ovals. For the first time, I suspected how much of this was her idea and how much was my son carrying it out because he was afraid of disappointing someone. Mom. Nathan's voice was a hose dragged over gravel, steady, rough. You need to take this seriously. I am, I said. Are you? How can you say that? He pushed back his chair too hard and it bumped the wall. Not the wall you're thinking of. This was just the ordinary temper of a hungry man who feels judged. But the house felt it. The house remembers where energy is stored. Because, I said, you're not listening. What happened next looked like 100 small arguments stacked and hammered into a frame. He reached for the folder. I put my hand on it first. He reached for my wrist. I pulled back. His fingers closed, then opened, and then, because momentum is a real thing, the way water is a real thing, I was moving faster than I could regain my feet. My hip met the drywall. Then my shoulder. Then the wall gave like a milk carton when you press your thumb into it, and it makes that soft, shocking sound. I slid through up to my ribcage. The dust tasted like old chalk and flour. And then the house was quiet. There are 100 worse things that could happen than going through drywall. Drywall is not brick. Drywall is not dignity, which cracks differently. I didn't scream, which I regret, because maybe a loud sound would have woke him from whatever trance had made him. Nathan's face went the color of typing paper. Hannah said my name in a voice that had never been scared before. And I, because I am who I am, took a breath and counted 1, 2, 3, 4. Alive. 5, 6, 7, 8. Not broken. 9, 10. Angry. Mom, Nathan whispered. Mom, I didn't answer. I did something stranger. I reached my left hand into the cavity where my shoulder had made its rude entrance, and I held still in a way that made the sensor think night had fallen inside the wall. Upstairs, the doorbell camera clicked on the hallway mic and began to record audio. A red LED behind the pantry shelf glowed, invisible to anyone who wasn't kneeling with their face against the frame. Hannah helped me out, gentler than she had ever been with me, and brushed my sweater like I was a child. Nathan took a step back as if distance could edit what had just been done. Dust sat in my hair. The rain was heavier now. Someone's car alarm complained 3 houses over. I'm fine, I said, which was almost true. But you need to leave. Please, Hannah said. Let us call. You need to leave, I repeated, and I must have said it the way my husband used to say no when a contractor tried to add a line item without the grace to blush. They left. The casserole cooled on the counter, congealing into a beige island. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the house settle around its wound. That night, I set a chair in front of the wall and looked at the hole like it was a mouth. The studs were raw and honest. The electrical conduit sat like a quiet metal snake. A fine layer of gypsum dust had settled across my floor, catching the lamplight like frost. I pressed the button behind the pantry shelf and the small hidden storage I'd carved into the wall shifted its weight. The envelope inside, heavy with duplicates of deeds, trust documents, and a new letter, slid toward me. The next morning I went to the clinic. A nurse half my age frowned at the bruises blooming like clouds along my shoulder and hip. Accidental fall? She asked, cursor hovering over a yes/no box that would become a data point somewhere. I said yes and hated myself. I am not a martyr, but I am a mother, and the line between those two things is made of barbed wire. I scheduled a follow-up. I called my lawyer from the parking lot. We're moving to part 2, I told her. I'll file the motion this morning, she said. And I'll have someone pick up the footage. I went home, baked a cake to keep my hands from shaking, and repaired the hole enough that it looked like a hard day in a house, not a headline. I set the repaired square, a temporary patch, slightly proud of the wall so that any glance would catch it. Sometimes to show you're hiding something, you show a little more. 2 days later, my pastor came by with a bag of oranges and a hug that knew exactly where not to press. He looked at the patch and asked if I wanted a handyman. I told him I had one. He asked if I'd considered telling Nathan to help. I told him I'd be okay. He took this with him like a secret. That week, texts came in waves. From Nathan, I'm sorry. From Hannah, we need to talk. From my granddaughter, a string of cherry emojis and a picture of her cat asleep like a question mark. From my lawyer, a series of document links and the digitized clip of the doorbell camera capturing the moment of impact in the reflection of the hall mirror. Not perfect, but clear enough to tell a story. Clear enough to set a boundary with teeth. That Saturday, I invited my family to Sunday dinner. I never canceled Sunday dinners, which is the sort of rule that makes the exception matter. I made roast chicken and potatoes as if they were an apology. I set the table with the good plates from my wedding and put the envelope with the new letter where the cake stand would cover it. I also placed a small black projector on the bookshelf, aimed at the space over the mantel where we usually hang graduation photos. They arrived tight-lipped. My grandson ran into my arms and pressed his cheek against my side with the precision of someone who'd been told to be gentle. Hannah smelled like rosemary and drywall dust. Nathan looked like he had slept in a chair, rumpled, desperate, diminished. I kissed my grandchildren, kissed Hannah's cheek because I like to love without looking for the ledger, and nodded to my son as if he were my neighbor, and we were both pretending we'd never met. We ate in companionable performance. Small talk about school and soccer cleats. Comments on the chicken. A little silence that sat on the lip of every sentence. After dessert, I stood and clicked the projector on with the same motion you might use to bless a child. The living room dimmed itself. The image appeared, the reflection in the hallway mirror of a man pushing a woman through a wall. No one spoke for 16 seconds. The projector hissed softly. When Hannah finally inhaled, it sounded like a straw pulling the last sweetness from a glass. I didn't mean it, Nathan said. I didn't mean, I just wanted to help. I asked, my voice steady. It didn't feel like help. I snapped, he whispered, and for the first time, I believed he hadn't planned it. Intention doesn't change outcome, but it can steer mercy. I am your mother, I said. Not your project. Not your possession. If you touch me like that again, I will call the police. I will press charges. I would do it to a stranger. I will do it to you. Tears stood in his eyes, but didn't fall. Hannah's hands were clenched in her lap, so tightly her knuckles were pale shells. The children were in the family room watching cartoons at a safe volume. The rain had ended. The house felt like it had inhaled and finally remembered to exhale. I turned to the mantel and pressed one finger against the underside, where the tiny remote was taped. On the screen, the clip paused and a still photo replaced it, me holding up a newspaper with yesterday's date, smiling with a bruise blooming like ink under my collar. And then letters appeared, white on black, simple as a recipe card. To my family, I have made a plan. I clicked again, and the lawyer's voice filled the room, calm as a metronome. She explained the trust, the conditions, the protections, how the house now belonged to a family foundation with a harmless name, how my medical proxy had been reassigned to a neutral professional until further notice, how the financial advisor we would be seeing was one I chose. She read the stipulations for my will: scholarships for single parents returning to school, a fund for the library's roof, set-aside accounts for each grandchild that would pay out at milestones tied to education and service, and, for Nathan and Hannah, a yearly stipend contingent on completion of a family counseling program and the absence of any legal orders for protection. I won't be coerced, I said when the recording ended. I won't be handled. But I also won't cut you off, because you are my children, in fact, if not in behavior these past weeks. My son tried to speak, but words can be slippery when there's truth under them. Hannah swallowed and found hers first. Why didn't you tell us you had? She stopped, eyes darting to the grandchildren's framed photos on the shelf, then back to me. Why didn't you tell us you were more comfortable than we thought? Because comfort changes people, I said. And I needed to know who you were without it. That isn't fair, she said. No, I agreed. It isn't. Neither is being pushed through your own wall. We sat with that. The projector's fan ticked as it cooled. The roast chicken scent had gone from welcome to cloying. My grandson laughed at something in the next room and called my name to come see. I stood. Dinner was lovely, I said briskly, as if we'd just traded recipes. Please help me clear. Hannah rose and reached for the plates with hands that trembled. Nathan muttered he'd take out the trash. In the kitchen, she turned to me, her voice low. I'm ashamed, she said. Good, I said, and then softened. Now do something with it. Weeks followed that felt like slow, cautious driving in fog. Nathan went to a counselor who didn't think much of excuses. Hannah sold 2 houses and then stopped working for a month. I accepted daily check-ins from a home health aide whose cheerfulness should be bottled and sold. I learned to sleep without replaying the moment in the kitchen like a rehearsal. Shame is not a plan, but it can be fuel. I also got to work on part 3. The envelope behind the shelf was never meant to be found by anyone but me. I replaced it with something else, a decoy, heavy with photocopied bills like the ones they put in training banks, and a letter in a new hand, my lawyer's, this time, explaining that the real plan was not in paper at all but in deeds and filings that existed in courthouses and servers, places that respected dates and signatures and not much else. I left that decoy where someone curious would look, and then I stopped thinking about it. If they went searching, I didn't want the search to be my calendar. I had other work. I began to spend carefully, intentionally, in ways that would make the town better and my future comfortable. I hired a contractor to put in grab rails and make the bathroom friendly to a woman who does not intend to stop living when she slows down. I paid the library's roofer in full and asked for a plaque that named the program after my husband. I funded a scholarship at the community college for students who've been told by someone they loved that they're not smart. I bought the little house next door through an LLC with a name that would sound like an old boat if you said it out loud. I set it up as a nest for visiting nurses and teachers on fellowships, people whose work carries the weight of other people's days and whose paychecks rarely match that weight. And I wrote. I wrote a lot. Letters to my grandchildren they would receive at 13, 18, 25. Letters to myself that began, "Dear me, you were right to be angry." You were also right to calm down now. Letters to Nathan that said what mothers do when they remember their sons in his first Halloween costume, and in his graduation cap, and in a kitchen where he forgot who he was for a whole 10 seconds. If this were a fable, now would be where the apology comes and washes everything clean. But real life is more stubborn. Change is a sequence, not a switch. Nathan kept coming by, kept offering to fix things, to carry heavy boxes, to carry light ones too, just to be present. He learned to wait for me to invite him into a decision. He learned the quiet art of repairing trust with consistent weather, not confetti. Hannah signed them up for counseling like it was a serious sport and took notes. She apologized to me once at the kitchen table, and it sounded practiced until she got to the part where she said she had been afraid of money her whole life, afraid of not having it and afraid of having it, and how that fear had turned into plans without people in them. I believed her. Then one afternoon in late spring, a contractor I had hired to replace the kitchen wall with real wood paneling called to tell me that the temporary patch had hidden a section of water damage unrelated to my fall, and that he'd found a stuck envelope behind the shelf. I took a breath. "Read the first line," I said. He did. He laughed. I laughed too. We kept going. "Here's the part one haven't told you. The video you read about at the beginning, the one playing behind the lawyer, wasn't just for drama. It was a mirror. It was there to help Nathan see the thing he was apologizing for. Words can float away. Pictures sit. In that conference room, with the projector purring and the letters' words drying in the air like laundry, my son cried. Not loud. A clean crying, the kind that happens when the body gets out of the way and lets the truth move through. The will was read not because I was dying, but because I wanted the living to begin. Afterward, we went to lunch and ate grilled cheese sandwiches that burned the roof of our mouths in the comforting way of childhood. On the way back to the car, Nathan reached for my hand. I let him. Summer warmed the town. The library's new roof shone like a single good idea. My granddaughter painted a mural on the side of the community center, a blue heron big as hope. The house next door hosted its first resident, a pediatric nurse who always smelled faintly of lavender and coffee. On Tuesdays she and I watched game shows and competed like it mattered, which it did in the way small things are the day's furniture. One evening, Hannah asked if she could come over alone. She stood in my kitchen in a linen dress that probably cost less than it looked and stared at the place where the wall had been patched so seamlessly it was only a memory now. She said, "Thank you." I waited. She said, "For not ruining us when you could have." "I didn't spare you," I said. "I spared the grandchildren from becoming referees." She nodded, mouth tight, then asked, "Will you teach me?" "To what?" "To handle money without handling people." So I did. We sat at the table with a binder, then a budget, then a plan. We replaced phrases like "we need" with specifics like "we want," "we can," "we won't." We talked about giving, how it recalibrates your fear of loss. We talked about the math old-fashioned interest makes if you're patient. We talked about what success looks like when nobody else is watching. Nathan joined us for some of those lessons. He learned to say a new sentence out loud, to practice the mouth feel of it until it fit. "I am sorry for what I did, and I won't do it again." The second clause is where repentance becomes a promise. The first without the second is just punctuation. By fall, there was a new rhythm. Sunday dinners with laughter that felt earned. Counseling sessions that sometimes ended in silence and sometimes in silly optimism. My lawyer stopped by once with a basket of tomatoes and said, "You know, most people don't do this part. They defend or they cut off. You're building." "Of course I am," I said. "I am a mother. We make homes. I'm not naive. Money is gravity. It pulls things to it, some of them lovely, some of them not. Greed doesn't evaporate because a good plan was drafted and signed and notarized. But accountability is also gravity. And love is the force an ordinary woman can take in both hands and use like a lever to move a family. The day the town dedicated the library roof, the mayor in his best blue blazer read the plaque aloud. My husband's name, then mine, then a line about the scholarships and the hopes they'll fund. The children pulled the covering cloth away, and it fluttered like a flag. Hannah squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Nathan stood with his arm around his daughter and his son on his shoulders, and when he caught my eye, he didn't look away. After the ceremony, we walked across the street for ice cream. The teenage clerk pretended not to hear when I asked what flavors were least likely to stain a blouse. We sat on a bench that had been dedicated to someone who used to sit there and critique the passing dogs. My grandson drew a map of our town on a napkin with sticky fingers and a tongue sticking out one corner of his mouth, the universal posture of concentration. "Grandma," he said, tapping the place on the napkin where our street should be. "This is your house." "Yes." "And this is our house." "Yes." "And this is the library." "It has a roof now." "It does." "And this is where the wall broke." He looked at me, not with fear but with curiosity, the way children look at everything. I thought about a million words I could put there and chose one. "Yes," I said. "That happened." "And you fixed it?" "We did," I said, and I meant the we. There is a temptation, when you've been hurt by your own, to write the story so it ends with exile, with a door closing that sounds like justice. But justice wears many shapes. Sometimes it is a locked cabinet, a court order, a cut check to a shelter. Sometimes it is a projector humming softly in a quiet room where a mother shows a son the mirror he made for himself. And sometimes it is a Sunday dinner where the potatoes are a little underdone because someone got to talking and forgot to set a timer, and nobody minds. On the anniversary of the day I met the studs in my kitchen, I baked a cake and invited the people whose hands had helped hold me up when the house seemed to tilt: the lawyer, the pastor, the nurse from next door, the contractor who had texted me when he found my decoy and made me laugh on a day I thought laughing might be done. I didn't invite Nathan and Hannah, not because they weren't welcome, but because some nights are for remembering who you are when you're not someone's mother or mother-in-law, but just yourself. We ate cake and drank tea and told stories that had sharp edges worn smooth from retelling. I went to bed early the way I like to, with a detective novel and a glass of water that would look accusingly full in the morning. I slept well. The house breathed with me, the old wood expanding and contracting like a kindly lung. At dawn I woke to a quiet house and a text from Nathan, a picture of his hand on the kitchen wall with a caption, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I stared at it for a long time, then typed back, "Thank you for making the apology into a life." It was the truest thing I could say. If you came here looking for a twist, maybe it's this: the fortune I hid didn't save me. Planning did. People did. The quiet work of telling the truth and then doing the next right thing saved me. The money built roofs and paid tuitions and installed rails that let me shower without thinking about falling. It built a little house with a quiet porch for nurses who spend their days standing. It didn't rebuild my son. He did that. With his wife. With our boundaries. With time. Still, sometimes I walk my fingers along the kitchen wall and find, with a private smile, the slight difference in texture where the patch blends into the old plaster. A seam you can feel if you know where to look. Proof that something broke and was repaired and holds. Proof that the house remembers, and that remembering doesn't always have to hurt. And, because life enjoys second acts, mine found me on a storm-vane night when the power fell out across half the town. I was in the pantry, fetching the good flashlight, when my phone lit with a message from Hannah: "The kids are scared. Nathan's stuck in traffic. Can we come?" Of course, I wrote back, though in storms the house can seem like a ship and every door a hatch. They arrived with rain in their hair and the smell of wet wool filling the doorway. My granddaughter carried the cat like an odd loaf of bread. My grandson clutched a science project like it could keep him safe. We camped in the living room with candles set low and far from little hands. I told stories that began with the words my husband used to swear were a charm, "When I was your age," and the children rolled their eyes exactly right. The wind pushed branches against the siding with a nervous drummer's fingers. Somewhere far off, a transformer popped like someone clapped once in a gym. That is when the back door rattled. "Probably the wind," I said, because in a storm it is always the wind until it is not. Then came a second rattle and the sound of the latch testing itself. Nathan called just then. "Traffic's at a standstill. Are you okay?" "Fine," I said. "Your back door rattles have grown legs." "What?" "Nothing we can't handle," I said, placing a steadying hand on Hannah's wrist. "Stay on the line." I moved through the dim house with the flashlight low, the way you're supposed to in the dark, so you don't blind yourself with your own courage. At the back door, I found the deadbolt half-turned. "Did you lock this when you came in?" I called over my shoulder. "Yes," Hannah whispered. The children were watching me with eyes like coins. I turned the bolt gently, then lifted the shade. A neighbor's teenager, soaked and sheepish, stood on the porch. He had the look of a boy whose prank had outrun his sense. I opened the door 2 inches and arched an eyebrow I inherited from my grandmother and have been putting to good use since 1968. "Sorry, Mrs. H," he said, using the abbreviation half the street favors for me. "We thought." "Don't tell me what you thought," I said, soft enough to be kind and firm enough to be heard through the rain. "Tell me what you'll do next." He apologized, properly, and left. I locked the door again. The children exhaled in relief, so loudly you could have mistaken it for the wind dying down. We returned to the living room, and I resumed my story at the sentence where a lesson would do the most good. We are brave, not because we aren't scared, but because we keep the people we love safe even when we are. Later, when the lights blinked back and the refrigerator hummed awake like an old friend, Hannah stood in the kitchen and looked at the place where the wall had healed. "The storm brought me here," she said, and I realized something. "This is the safest house I know." "It is," I said. "Because we made it so." We didn't talk about the money that night, or the will, or the clip that had once held all our breath hostage. We ate toast with jam. We listened to the gutters learn their job again. We tucked the children into the spare room. They fell asleep like sailors after a good voyage. In the morning, Nathan arrived with coffee and an apology for the 1,000th time, which is exactly how many times an apology takes when a wall is involved. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette made of worry and love, and said, "I thought I could handle every storm by myself." "You can," I said. "If you remember you're not by yourself." Months folded, then unfolded. The foundation in the bland-named trust funded a small community garden behind the library. The heron mural watched over neat rows of tomatoes and herbs. Hannah started a class at the community college on financial literacy. I sat in the back row for the first session and raised my hand at appropriate intervals to say things like, "Please explain that again for the people who are pretending we don't need to hear it twice." Nathan found a job that didn't require him to count his worth in hours billed, but in people helped, a change I wouldn't have believed possible the day the drywall let me through. He came home tired and satisfied in the way a good day makes you, with his collar unbuttoned and his voice soft. Once, he stopped at the doorway, touched the kitchen wall where the seam is invisible unless you know it, and smiled that sheepish, boyish smile that mothers keep in their pockets long after their sons forget how to make it. One winter afternoon, when the library smelled like wet coats and cinnamon, a woman I didn't know approached me by the new fiction table. "You don't know me," she said, "but I know who paid for the roof." I opened my mouth to demur, to talk about the foundation with the forgettable name, but she continued, "My daughter is here every day after school." I just wanted to say thank you. I nodded. Sometimes you accept gratitude like medicine you didn't know you needed. The story might have ended there, with quiet afternoons and the kind of peace that looks plain enough to be overlooked. But a year after the wall, someone made a different kind of knock, a man in a polished suit who introduced himself as a consultant in elder planning and said Nathan had referred him. He had a smile that reminded me of floors that have been waxed too much. I invited him in because you learn more from how people behave in your house than you ever will from how they behave in theirs. He sat too straight and looked at the pantry twice. He launched into a presentation involving charts with colors chosen for their soothing qualities and words like streamline and protect. "Protect from what?" I asked. "From mismanagement," he said. "Whose?" He didn't blink. "Yours," he said, then smiled as if he'd paid me a compliment. I said, and something in me that had been sleeping sat up. "Let me show you something." I led him to the living room and turned on the projector. The screen lit with a still image I now keep in a folder called Boundaries, the title page to a short film I hope never to screen again. He frowned as if he had discovered there would be a pop quiz he hadn't studied for. "We don't need your services," I said when the title card faded. "And please don't use my son's name for your foot in my door." He stood in stiff offense, thanked me for my time, and left, but his business card lay forgotten on the coffee table. That evening, I called the number on the back that belonged to the state's Elder Protection Task Force. I am not vengeful by nature, but sunlight is disinfectant and some people invite weather. A month later, I received a polite note. Thank you for the tip. Your consultant has been reminded of the lost teeth. I placed the card in my binder under a tab I labeled, Don't Forget What You Know. In spring, the garden behind the library grew a row of sunflowers that turned their faces the way I have too, toward heat and light. The children learned to pick basil without uprooting the plant. Nathan learned a good joke and told it badly, which is the right way to tell good jokes in a family kitchen. Hannah taught a second section of her class and opened it with a story about a woman who learned to measure wealth in roofs and rails and repaired places. On a quiet Sunday, the pastor preached a sermon about repair. He didn't mention walls, but I knew he knew. After the service, he shook my hand and said, It's remarkable what you built out of that day. I had good materials, I said. He looked surprised, then laughed. Faith, stubbornness, I said, and a decent set of tools. If I have a legacy, I hope it looks like this, not the number that made eyes widen, not the hush that money can teach a room, but the steady, ordinary courage to make a plan and carry it out without making enemies where you can help it. The world will offer you a dozen chances a day to escalate. You can take one or two, if they're the kind that point in the direction of truth. But better to de-escalate most of the time, to let a storm pass over your roof and into the next county before you start to count shingles. Still, every year on the date my back met the studs, I run my palm across the place where the seam used to catch the light. It's smooth now. That's not forgetting. That's finishing. Tonight, I will eat leftover cake in my long robe and turn the lights off in a house I own with both my name and my nerve. The projector sleeps on the shelf. The wall holds. The grandchildren will come tomorrow and ask for pancakes shaped like animals badly enough to make them funnier. Hannah will bring a salad full of things too green for dessert. Nathan will carry in 2 bags without being asked and set them down without the scrape of old fights. And I will be here. 69, unbroken, unafraid. A woman whose fortune is measured in roofs and rails and repaired places. A woman who learned, finally, that sometimes the most generous...
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video, like and subscribe. Bye bye!